Jorge Tittinger, who is the founder and CEO of Tittinger Consulting. So Jorge is a highly analytical and incisive senior executive with over 30 years of progressive leadership experience, directing substantial growth and leading the turnaround of underperforming organizations. He is an accomplished board member and a C-suite executive with expertise in large multi-billion-dollar organizations and startups focusing on technology industries. He's led and executed 2 successful turnarounds that resulted in high premium acquisitions. And most recently, Jorge was a president and CEO and board member of Silicon Graphics, one of the leading global companies in high-performance computing, and served on a number of other positions. He's educated at Stanford University, holds a Master's of Science in Engineering Management, in addition to a Master's of Science in Electrical Engineering. So he's really, really smart and accomplished. So we should listen carefully to everything that he has to say. And he's also, again, one of our, is recognized as the CEO of the Year for Operational Excellence by CEO World Awards, and one of the top 100 Latinos in technology by HITEC for 5 consecutive years. So Jorge, please welcome.
Thank you. All right. So you heard her. You got to listen to me. Pay attention. I want to add a couple of things actually to my background because I think they're relevant for this audience. Like many of you, I think I got into a point in my career where a bunch of what I want to do is actually give back. So I'm very involved in philanthropic endeavors, mostly with the Hispanic community and mostly around education. So I'm the chairman of the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley, and our focus is education for the underprivileged, mostly Latino community in the Valley. I'm also on the board of the Stanford Hospital, which is a phenomenal organization, and most recently joined the board of an organization called Innovate Public Schools. And as you can imagine, I'm from California. I'm actually from Peru, but live in California. And we have the highest tax rate of any state in the country, and yet I think we rank 42nd in public education. So not very good. And this organization is really aimed at fixing that problem. And unfortunately, a lot of the underperforming schools happen to be populated by Latino kids. So that's a problem. Tittinger Consulting is essentially, I had to put a name to what I'm doing now. Most recently was the CEO of Silicon Graphics. We actually sold Silicon Graphics to HPE. And so now I'm mostly focused on doing board work and really like board level or C-suite level consulting in very specific areas. And you'll see some of the stuff that I've been working on, and hopefully it's interesting and it opens eyes to the importance of culture in execution of strategies. And like I said, I've been in HITEC for 5 years, and it's a wonderful organization. So I hope you appreciate everything that you're getting here. And I'm going to move quick because Viviana told me I had 4 hours, and now she's cut that to 45 minutes. And so we're going to cram some of this material. And let's see if it works, okay? Oh, by the way, the Stratum Group is one of the organizations I'm part of. I have 2 partners there, and there's a lot of research that's behind a lot of what I'm going to talk about today. So this is not just good thoughts. It's actually well researched and been executed a number of times. So, a lot of the success or failure of organizations and companies is blamed on culture. Yet nobody seems to want to talk about culture, except in very fuzzy, soft ways where not a lot can be done about it. And so part of the work that we've done is to try to demystify culture, to make it actually something that you can tackle, you can address, and you can make sense of. And so, does this work? Oh, yeah. This is not atypical. Of course, this is a caricature, but it's not that far off. When people are basically saying, oh, God, something I have to do something about culture. So I'm going to assign somebody, Timkins in this place, to go tell me what our culture is. The reality is it's mostly invisible. It's mostly hard to deal with, which is why people don't really go address it in a straightforward way. And if you look at these numbers, most people aren't happy with the culture of their company. So one of the things I'm going to ask everybody to do is, as I go through this, I'm going to introduce you to certain concepts, and I want you to think about where does your company fit or your group fit, okay? So the reality is, like I said, culture is mostly invisible. What we can see are things like the organization, the org chart, what we post on walls about mission and vision and values. So it's everything that we say we do. But the reality is, what we really do is actually below the waterline. There are attitudes, there's trusted networks that nobody knows about. There's unwritten rules, there's a whole folklore of companies, especially as companies get older. They have a whole set of connections and networks that are not really visible unless you're part of that company for a long time, right? So one of the challenges when dealing with culture is that everything that's below that waterline, you can't see it. So part of what we're going to try to show you is how to actually make all of that visible. Okay? By the way, if anybody has questions, raise your hand. We'll address them as we go, okay? So the objective today is to make culture visible and present the tools that you can use to assess if your company is poised to embark in a transformation. There was a lot of talk yesterday about transformations, especially digital transformations given the audience. But this really applies to any kind of transformation in a company. One of the things I failed to say about my background is that, actually no, Rosa did say, I led 2 turnarounds. Turnarounds are not easy, and they're really basically recreating a company, right? They are transformations. So the methodology we use is this thing called culture mapping. And I'm going to introduce you to traits, we call them, and I'll explain them, the goods, the mood, and the style of a company. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the insights from my friend Jeffrey Moore. How many people know Jeffrey Moore? Okay, not many. You know him well. He does some phenomenal work in actually trying to map roadmaps for how to improve and how to deal with what he calls the technology adoption curve. Right? So some of you may have heard of the book Crossing the Chasm. That's kind of his premier book. And he's built up on that a lot. And I forget the name of the gentleman from Fannie Mae who talked about these horizons yesterday. And so that work comes from Jeffrey. All right? So making the invisible visible. So there's 3 areas, social network analysis, culture dimension analysis, and accountability network analysis that, in the social network part is who is really key to changing the company, right? And I'll show you tools that actually can produce maps that are very different than an org chart that reveal truly who is doing what in the company and who has what kind of power in the company. And I'm going to define power in a very specific way. Power is the relative capacity to generate effective action, okay? Remember those words, relative and effective action. This is not about who's stronger, who has a bigger group, nothing to do with that. Right? It's how can you generate action that is effective, better, bigger, faster than anybody else. Right? That's what power is. The second thing in this dimensional analysis is how well is your culture aligned with your strategy. And my claim is that if you don't have a culture that is aligned with the strategy, you will not be successful in executing your strategy. Doesn't matter how smart you are, doesn't matter how great your products are. If the culture is not conducive to that strategy, it won't work, okay? And the third thing is, how does work actually get done in your company? Because all those 3 things need to be aligned for success in the company. So we'll start with the social network analysis. So this chart, maybe everybody has one of these, right? Or some people don't publish them, by the way, but every organization has one of those. It's an org chart. It basically gives you a map of who has what authority. So-and-so is somebody else's boss, right? In this case, you see that Jones is a SVP, and then there's Cole, 1, 2, 3 levels below. But when you do the analysis of influence, this is what this map shows. Cole is actually a lot more powerful than Jones. And the reality is, in many cases, unfortunately, senior management doesn't have visibility all the way to Cole. So imagine how helpful it will be if you're in a company that needs to transform and you knew who the real people, who the real influences are. Especially, I've been a CEO 3 times, and I knew my staff really well. I knew their staff really well. And then below that, especially the bigger the company, the harder it is to really have an intimate knowledge of who's doing what and how good they are. So this kind of mapping is tremendously valuable. Now imagine this applied in a merger or an acquisition situation where, the first thing, when I've done a bunch of acquisitions, I go, who are your key people? Right? I've been on the other side as well, right? When people ask me, who are my key people, I'll never tell them. I'll tell them after they bought me. Not before, because then they go hire those people and I'm out of luck. But, it's true, right? But imagine having true understanding of who in your company are the true influencers in different aspects of the company. It's very valuable, right? So these are the kinds of things that you can find out through this analysis. Who are the networkers? Who are the true experts? Who's setting direction for the company, right? Who do you talk to? I mean, this is a tremendously powerful network, right? A network where people go to get help when things are not right or don't go right for them. How many people have seen in their company where you go, who's working on this really key project? And it's the same people over and over and over and over, right? That's because they belong here. They get over-assigned typically, and they're the same people over and over. And then, who relies on you? Who are your internal key customers? And many times we don't know. But all of this can be revealed by doing this kind of analysis. This is a map, and this is a real company. This is something we did, and this analysis of 2,000 plus employees, global, et cetera, et cetera. And the numbers represent people, right? So somebody is number 852. This doesn't mean how many connections they have, right? And it is purely for anonymity, right? And the questions here were who is setting the direction for the company, and the size of the circle is how many times that name came up, right? And the closeness to the middle is the importance of that name. And luckily in this company, 852 was the CEO, okay? Which is a good thing for this company. So the CEO was really who was setting direction, right? But then you see other folks like number 199, tremendously powerful from a direction setting in the company. And there was somebody that didn't show up in the org chart at a high level. Tremendously powerful. In this case, he happened to be one of the tech leaders in one of the large divisions in the company. Okay? This map reveals something very different than an org chart, right? This could be Cole, right, in that map that I showed you earlier. This thing was, who are the experts? SME stands for subject matter experts, right? In this case, 198 had the most mentions, if you will, right? And again, same company. Good thing was, this guy is the CTO. So from a technical perspective, the right person was setting the direction for the company. I've seen maps that have it completely backwards, right? I mean, the CEO doesn't show up, et cetera. So and there's multiple dimensions, and this actually shows you the degree of integration in the company, right? So each color represents a region, and what you see is that Asia is very well distributed all over the world. They're connected all over the world. While this is Europe, the Europeans are basically talking to themselves, right? How many Europeans here? Except the Spaniards. The Spaniards show up somewhere else, we put them here with the Latins that are all over. But then look over here. There's this group is a subsidiary of the company. They're not talking to anybody, right? And that's a problem, right? So you start seeing these maps, and it gives you actually actionable insight to go do changes and make changes, right? So again, these are just examples, right? So in social network analysis, you start to really reveal who is important, who decides, who leads, who follows, who connects, and it's very valuable as you're assessing your ability to actually make a transformation. Yes? Yes. The reality is, I think having that kind of insight is important, period. It becomes a lot more relevant as you're trying to enter a transformation. And I'll talk a little bit about transformations because they're very, very dangerous for companies. And sometimes you have to engage in them. But for example, in my case, when I first took over Silicon Graphics for the second time, because I worked for them in the glory days, I needed to know who did what, because my org chart did not reveal anything. I had a group of executives. My predecessor was a managed by fear CEO, and these guys couldn't make a commitment, couldn't make a decision. And so I had to dig and figure out who is doing what in the company to not transform, but in this case, it was a turnaround, but it wasn't necessarily like a transformation around the business model, right? So I think this is essential. It gains importance if you're going to change drastically. Okay? All right, so now I'm going to introduce you to 3 concepts here. Right? Goods, mood, and style. And my claim here is these traits are what shapes culture the most in a company, right? So, and I don't like the word the goods, but I cannot come up with a better word. So if anybody after this has a better word, please let me know. And the goods are really the key focus areas for a company. What does the company really care about? The mood is the background predisposition that the company has. And there's 8 structural moods that I'm going to talk about. 4 of them are negative moods, and 4 are the counter positive moods. And I think it's really important to understand what mood does your company have. And if you're in one of those negative moods, how the heck do you get out of there? Either as a company, or if you're an employee of that company, you out of that company. Because they tend to not be moods that are conducive to success, right? And then style is what it says. So I'll use an example around driving. How many people from New York? I know there's a few. You guys drive like crazy people. And if you don't drive like a New Yorker when you're in New York, you're the crazy one, right? And so style compels you to act in a certain way, right? I don't know, I've been in a few companies, and one of the things I noticed the most was the way people dressed. So, I was at a company called Applied Materials. It was the largest company in semiconductor equipment. And everybody at Applied wore a tie and no jacket. And pretty soon, all the new employees were wearing a tie and no jacket. And then I went to KLA-Tencor, who's another large semiconductor equipment company. And there, nobody wore a tie, but everybody wore a jacket. And again, pretty soon, everybody was dressing the same way. And so that was the style, right? And if you don't adjust to the style, if you don't comply with the style, you are kind of, on your own, right? You stand out, not always in a positive way. And I know clothing is something meaningless in a sense, but it's an example of how style compels you to act in a company. So think about things in your own company where it is the style, right? It's the same thing with following with the example of driving. If you're in the Midwest and you drive in the Midwest, it's very genteel, right? You stop at a red light, you let people go. People who are walking on the street, you wait for them. If you get a New Yorker driving there, it'll cause problems, right? Unless he adapts to the style. Right? So that's the way how to think about these 3 concepts, right? So we'll start with goods. So the goods comprise what is valued, and it's actually partially visible on the visible part of that iceberg, right? So, there's a mission. How are we going to treat our customers? How are we going to treat our shareholders? What are we going to promise to them? How are our employees going to interact with each other? What does our strategy, how will executives lead our strategy? And then how do we actually continue to develop know-how, right? And the point here is companies tend to focus on only a few of these things. Everybody will tell you they're all important, and that's actually true. But the reality is, as a company, you tend to focus on one, maybe two, and the others you do, but not as a key focus area. Okay? Some companies that really call themselves, they're customer intimate, right? If they are, their focus is going to be over here, right? Some, especially public companies, really want to focus on return to the shareholders, so it's going to be over here. And if there's a tie, what will break the tie is what is their focus, okay? All right, we're going to talk about styles. So style is how do we act in general, and style grants meaning to our actions. So there's a whole bunch of different styles here, right? There's probably more. So this is just an example. So think about, read this quickly, I won't go over them, and think about what is the style of your company. So for example, a company that's opportunistic in style, and each style, by the way, has its positives and its negatives, right? But by themselves, they're neither good nor bad. So an opportunistic style is a company is always looking for what's the next thing that I can get into, and they get into it. So one of the good things about opportunistic styles is these companies tend to be pretty agile. They move quickly, they decide quickly, et cetera, et cetera. The downside is you probably don't have a strategy, even if you say you do, right? Because you're going to be moving to the next thing as it shows up because it's unpredictable. You don't know what's going to show up. Yet if something that looks good shows up, the company goes, whoop, goes there. So it's there. People who work in companies with an opportunistic style feel like they're going from pillar to post all the time. Okay? Neither good nor bad. That's what it is, yes. Yeah, that's a great question. So the question for those in the back, if they didn't hear, is what happens within the company? You have different styles within different organizations. That happens all the time, by the way. But there is a prevalent mood at the top of the company that it really is set by the C-level executives, right? So when you do this analysis, especially if you end up with styles that are not conducive to your strategy, or in a case of transformation, moods that are not conducive, you want to go deeper, right? You can do the same analysis at the division level, at the group level, et cetera. But you're right, especially larger companies have multiple styles, but one tends to be prevalent at the C level, okay? So how many people are in be cool style? Nobody. Wow. So fashion companies, this is it. They all want to be cool. Right? How many people are on the play to win? One. No? So play to win. Huh? No, but as your primary style, right? So one of the dangers of play to win is that you tend to ignore people. Right? You're going to do whatever it takes to win, whatever it takes, and many times that is ignore people. The contrast is the cultivate style, where it's all about the people. Right? And it could be excessive, right? It could be where it's all about the people and who cares about the business, right? So again, there's no good or bad, it's just what is. Some styles are better for some kinds of actions in the company. All right, and moods. Moods show how things matter. Not what things matter, but how things matter. And like I said, we've identified 8 moods, 4 pairs of 2, right? And style and mood are the least visible and most important aspects of culture. So this I really do want you to do. There's a pair of moods, resentment and hope, right? The ones on the left are negative moods. The ones on the right are positive, are the counter, if you will, right? So a mood of resentment in a company is, when people go, there's no hope. Nothing's going to change. It doesn't matter what I do. People are resentful. They tend to blame. That's the typical move. The typical move on a company that has a mood of resentment is somebody else's fault. How many are on companies like that? We won't tell your bosses unless they're here. No, come on. There's many, many, many companies that are living in this mood. And the opposite is hope, where you know, as a company, you know there's actually goodness in the future if you actually work together and work well and align well, et cetera, et cetera. Very different, right? So if you're tackling the same issue with a mood of resentment or a mood of hope, who do you think is going to have a better chance of succeeding? The resentment guys? How many people think the resentment people? Okay, you passed the IQ test. Yeah. The other pair is fear and admiration, right? And fear hides, right? So when I first took over SGI to transform it, that was the mood, fear. You know, people would say, if you disagree with the CEO, people disappear into the night. I mean, I'm not kidding you. That was the phrase. I'm like, holy shit. So I hired a bodyguard for a while and, you know, made sure that I was protected. But really, fear is, you know, you're always thinking something bad's gonna happen. So people who are in companies where fear is the main mood, they avoid taking accountability. Because if you're accountable, it doesn't work, you're out. So it's pass the ball to somebody else and don't be accountable. While admiration celebrates, right? So the counter is admiration. You know, a lot of startups live in this mood, right? We're going to do something. We're going to get that milestone, and we're going to have a big beer bash, right? And people then are much more apt to actually take risks, to take ownership, et cetera. It sounded to me like Fannie Mae is in that mood from what they talked about yesterday, right? They celebrate failures, you know, all that stuff is here. The next pair is arrogance and joy. You know? So arrogant companies, I'll give you some examples. Enron. They thought they were above the law. I know I think there's a few Wells Fargo people here, but you know, Wells Fargo is now in a transformation of mood. They were arrogant, big time, right? That led to all kinds of problems. So it's actions, because you know, these companies think they know better than anybody and whatnot, and it tends to, Uber, right? The latest issues with Uber all came from the CEO living in this mood. The opposite one is joy. Okay, so you want to be getting out of arrogance if you are there. The reality is an arrogant company will deceive because they think the rules don't apply to them, right? So they'll take action. They know better than everybody. And so they'll deceive. And then the last pair is resignation and discipline and zeal, right? And zeal might not be a great word, but it's, you know, resignation of pieces. You know, so I had a great CEO a few companies ago, and I call him Eeyore. You know, from Winnie the Pooh? Eeyore is the donkey who's always like, oh my God, nothing's gonna happen. And he was a great COO, but he was such a downer. That the only thing that I worked with him on was get your butt out of this mood and get over here, right? And zeal is, you know, you seek a particular discipline. It could be, I want to have the best design team in the world. I want to have the best customer service. And people align behind that, and they fully commit to that, and it's a very, very different mood. Okay? Questions, comments, make sense? Yeah, you guys haven't had coffee, have you? There you go.
Hi, good morning. I'm Cindy Healy from Microsoft. It just reminds me of like this, what is it, the 7 hats or the 6 hats type of a situation where sometimes it's good to have the person in there that's the Eeyore, that's at, you know, when you're sitting at the table making a decision, somebody who's going to raise risks. You don't want everyone over on zeal.
True. So each mood has its own culture, if you will, and its own downsides, right? So to taken to the extreme, they're not necessarily good. I'm going to argue with you. I think it's really helpful to have somebody who is maybe more grounded, but resigned, not. And so somebody who might play devil's advocate in a meeting and those kinds of things. But some, you know, moods are contagious. Right? And the higher you are in the organization, the more visible you are, the more contagious your mood. So to have the COO be like that, not a good thing. I don't care how grounded he was, right?
Great.
But you're right. To the extreme, even the good moods are not so good for the organization. They're unbalanced, basically.
Thank you.
All right, so, and then the key practices, that I talked about, the bottom of that circle. It's like how do top executives convey what's important to the company? That's a key practice. How's the communication? Do they do blogs? Do they do all-hands meetings? Do they do everything by email? Do they not communicate? All of that actually shapes the culture of the company. Key practices are recurrent. You might get lucky once and have a great meeting, while all your other meetings have no agenda, no purpose, not well managed. And they're embedded within the accountability networks of the company, right? So on key practices, people know pretty clearly what's rewarded, what's not rewarded, et cetera, okay? Doesn't mean that they're good key practices, by the way, right? They're just there. And some examples is, how is success acknowledged? Do people get bonuses? Do they get stock? Do they get to stand up in all-hands meetings and given a plaque? Do they get ignored? How is failure dealt with? In many companies, nothing is done with failure. It's really amazing to me where there's no clear consequences for not doing things correctly in many, many, many companies. Or they're there on paper, right? They're there at the top of the iceberg, and they're really not the practice that the company does. Okay. So these dimensions underlie all aspects of culture. The goods are mostly reflected at the top, right? The way that practices are done tend to address some of the things that are below the line, and style and mood relate to all the other ones, right? So if you start seeing, sorry, I'll go back. If you start to really understand where the company puts value, you start to really understand some of those things. On the signature practices and on the style and mood. So true understanding of everything here actually makes the water level go way down. And you can truly then have culture that is visible and actionable. Yes.
So Jorge, one question. I see that how you celebrate, how you compensate. A lot of companies do this yearly compensation, yep. where if you want to drive culture, sometimes I think that people behave in at the right moment, at the right time.
Yeah.
And then because they know the cycles, have you seen companies kind of do more frequent compensations to drive culture versus just kind of the...
Yeah, great question. So the question, well, you actually had your mic. So actually what I've seen is a trend away from annual performance reviews and all of that stuff to much more dynamic, real-time assessments and much more freedom for leadership to actually reward or punish at a real time as well. Not easy, right? Especially in large companies that want to have some differentiation or some acknowledgement of who's doing what, but it is definitely the trend, right? How many companies still have annual performance reviews? A lot. How happy are your employees when you do the annual performance review? How happy are the managers? Huh? It depends, yeah, it depends on what you tell them. But how many have grade inflation? Oh, come on. Grade inflation. So really, they're mediocre employees, but you're going to tell them they're good because if not, they get pissed, and right? Most companies, right? When I joined SGI, we had our ranking up to 4, right? So 4 was great. The average ranking for the company was 3.76. And I'm going like, oh my God, we must be really freaking good. And we were going down to a bankruptcy in a hurry. So be careful with those numbers. And I think the better practice is, you do something good, you get acknowledged right there, you get your either reward or whatnot there, right? Yeah, the style was fear, right? The style was fear about everything, because he was like, oh my God, if I give Jimmy a bad number, he'll leave, and now what do I do? Because it was very difficult to attract good talent when a company had that reputation of living in fear. Okay, but again, assessment of this level reveals the whole bottom of the iceberg. So we'll go there first, then there.
Just a quick question on the last slide around rewards, and I can't remember what the bottom piece was, but there was a comment there around calling out failure. I can't remember what it said exactly, and we're also working really hard in the industry right now to encourage risks. And so just to comment on, I'd love to hear a comment from you on navigating that, how failure is dealt with, but also how to reward risks, even if it potentially leads to failure.
Yeah, great question. So you know, this comment doesn't mean that you gotta be nasty, right? The reality is, in a company that wants to have innovation, if there's not a safe haven, if you will, for people taking risks and potentially failing, people are not going to innovate. Okay? One of the things that I believe distinguishes Silicon Valley from anywhere else in the world that I've been, maybe with the exception of Israel, is that it's okay to fail. As a matter of fact, when I look at candidates, if they haven't had 1 or 2 failures, I go, did he take enough risks? You know, 20 years ago when I was hiring people, it was like, have you stayed with your same company forever and ever and ever? And I thought, oh, they're loyal, so I'm going to hire them. Now I don't. If somebody hasn't changed forever, I go, why not? The world's so full of opportunities and you're still there. Especially if the company's not so good, right? If they're a great company, I go, okay, fine, I get it, but, right? So this doesn't mean that you need to be punishing or what. No, it's just, how do you do it? You know, if people fail, do you celebrate it? Do you say, okay, great, we're going to learn, just don't do it again? Or I'm going to slap your hand, I'm going to sit you in the corner facing the wall. I mean, you know, those things is what this means, right? So it isn't necessarily a negative thing, but there's got to be a consistent way that that gets treated. Otherwise, people don't know what to expect. Okay? Yes. Actually, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Way over there was second, then you. Yeah.
So my question is on globalization. So how can you keep some of the good things in and filter out some of the bad things, especially when a company operates throughout the world?
Great question. Carefully. No, but the reality is, I have one of my mentors always said, think globally, act locally. Right? So you want to have a company that has a culture and a style that is pervasive across the company. But there's very, very different local rules, laws, moods, et cetera, that need to be taken into account. Right? And most of us don't do a very good job of that. And because letting everything be local, if you're dealing with, many of the customers are global, right? You're going to show up as a different company every time you deal from another region, right? And at the end, these things actually go meet up at some level that's a single level with a head of procurement or whatnot. And you don't want to be 5 different companies. So it's a careful thing, but I really like that notion of think globally but act locally. Over there.
Good morning. My name is Tammy Early, and I work for Cisco Systems. I just wanted to say that I completely agree with everything that you're saying. Inside of my team, we talk about the fact that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And in Cisco, we have now adopted, what you're talking about. We don't do yearly reviews anymore. As a matter of fact, we do weekly check-ins. And the only people that are reviewed are the leaders. And they are given surveys. Your team is given a survey to see how you're doing, because studies have shown that people leave a company not because of their company, but because of their direct line manager. So we've made a really concerted effort to ensure that our leaders are leading in the right direction authentically and giving back to our people to make sure that we can make the market transition that every technology company, actually every company, is facing today.
That's great. Did you train the managers?
Yes, and it's a perpetual training.
Because the failure that most companies that I've seen in transitioning from this it's the most painful time of the year, right? The managers hate writing all these reports all at the same time. The employees hate receiving them because either they know it's not true, or they're always saying, well, I should be better, right? I'm a 4. We used to do self-assessments first, and then the manager would edit it.
Yeah.
And oh my God, I tell you, I had a team of superstars in every position, no matter whether they had met or missed their numbers forever and ever and ever, right? But a lot of companies shift without training, and that's a problem.
Training is essential, and I think the scarier part is having your entire team anonymously rate you, right? And so when you're rating your leader is very in tune with what is important to our individual contributors so that we can make a market transition and everyone's in the same boat.
Yep, great. I'm going to move quickly because I have, oh, Viviana's giving me more time. She's nice to me. She's Peruvian too, so. I get the Peruvian extra 5 minutes. All right, so here, well, this we covered already, right? So now we're going to move to this other concept, which is horizons and zones. And again, those who know Jeffrey, I don't know if you've read his latest work. It's called Zone Management. Actually, no, it's called The Zone to Win. Has anybody read that? Okay, it's really good. So basically, this is talking about innovation and transformations, okay? And the point here is that disruptive innovation, disruptive change, actually changes the rules of the game. You cannot play the same way you were playing before, right? And this can either, you can lead it or it can happen to you. And how to act depends on whether it's zone offense or zone defense, right? When the market does this to you, you're playing defense. When you do this to the market, you're playing offense. And you must catch the next wave, right? And these are examples of waves, right? So cloud computing, already well established, but it completely changed the dynamic of using software to optimize all kinds of services. That's really what cloud does, okay? Smartphones, you can communicate with anybody, anywhere, at a pretty cheap price nowadays, right? It changed the way people were. How many people would be okay to be without their smartphone for any longer than 7 minutes? Nobody, yeah. So it's a reality, right? Imagine the world today with no smartphones. It's a different world, right? Machine learning, there's a lot of talk about, so these are waves that are behind us. This one is, these two maybe are still with us or still evolving, right? But machine learning basically optimizes any digital system, right? And so if you're attacked by that, not every company is, by the way, but if you are attacked by that, you need to actually do something different. IoT, there's people who don't believe it. Who believes IoT is going to be a big force in the future? All right, almost everybody. I think it will. Now, whether it be a great source of revenue or income or profit, that's to be determined. But IoT is changing the world quickly, every day, in many, many industries. And cognitive computing is, I think, the next wave after that, right? And so this leads to autonomy of things, of cars or whatnot. You got to get there. But the point really is, any one of these waves changes the rules of the game if your entity is impacted by them. Not automatically, right? So you need to really be making an assessment of whether it is or not, right? So keep this in mind, this notion of the waves. And then I'm going to introduce this. That's really important, right? So there's 3 horizons in which work happens, right? Horizon 1 produces an ROI between today and the next year. It's typically the world of manufacturing and sales. You're building what you can sell, you're selling what you can build, et cetera, et cetera. The current categories are for today's commitments. Whatever you're committing to the customer today lives in Horizon 1. I'm going to go to Horizon 3, typically the world of R&D, right? What are you designing? What are you bringing into the market or your company that will produce an ROI in 3 to 5 years, maybe longer, depending on your industry? And then Horizon 2 is, the middle, right? And the middle is where the difficulty is. So most companies do this well if they're a good company. Most companies do that well if they're large enough to be able to really invest in R&D in a meaningful way, right? And so if you're truly going to innovate, you have to have enough money to innovate. And one of the reasons why Wall Street pays so much attention to gross margin in companies is because gross margin is what gives you the money to invest in R&D. Okay? If you have really thin gross margins, you cannot invest below the line. So, but the problem is here, right? The problem is there, and I'll tell you why. So when you're looking at innovation, there's really two types. Sustaining innovation, which is what companies typically do, right? I have product X, I'm going to have product X plus 1, I'm going to have product X plus 2, they have a nice roadmap. The way to think about this is you're putting ideas at the top of a funnel, and the things, as time goes by and your designs continue to go, they go through the funnel, and at the end, hopefully you come out of here with something that's good. When you're doing disruptive innovation, and that's the world of Horizon 2, you really ought to think about it as an hourglass. Okay? The bottleneck is not in the R&D functions. The bottleneck is in the go-to-market functions, sales and marketing, et cetera, because you're always in a competition for resources, right? I tell you, one of the most important things that typically a CEO gets to do is to decide what not to do. It is actually one of the hardest things because everything sounds great. But once you start allocating resources and you go, I don't have enough for this other program that actually sounds great. Mistake number one is to misallocate or underallocate the entire portfolio of things, which is a typical thing to do. Very hard to actually go and say, well, I'm not going to do that one, or I'm going to keep it in Horizon 3 until I'm ready. And the trick here is one at a time. The chances of success on companies that are doing more than one Horizon 2 disruptive innovation are pretty bleak. Okay? So entering the market with a disruptive innovation is not a natural state for the company. Right? It puts the whole company in conflict with itself because remember, it is all about how are you allocating resources. And by that I mean money and people. Right? So if the true strategy is where you put your money and where you put your people. It doesn't matter what you put on the paper. Right? The reality is if you're saying this is the most important thing for my company in the future and you're under-allocating resources, that is not the most important thing for your company in the future. Okay? So think about sustaining innovation. This is okay. It could be multiple at the same time. Typically, it's multiple things at the same time that are going through Horizon 2 because every product line has the next one, et cetera, et cetera. For disruptive innovation, hourglass, and one at a time. And then this last concept, and then I'll kind of try to tie it all together. So there's 4 zones of competition, right? Typically, this is the world of sustaining innovations, right? The performance zone is it's selling and building what you do today. It's Horizon 1, right? The productivity zone is all of the groups that are supporting revenue live in the productivity zone. HR, finance. In many cases, IT used to be there, right? Keep the world running. Don't get me in trouble. Make sure the phones work, that the systems don't fall down. Completely different today for CIOs. Completely different, right? CIOs today live here. They're essential to producing material revenue. Okay? Incubation zone. Basically R&D. What are you doing for the future, right? The danger is everybody who lives in any one of these zones thinks they are it, right? These guys, we're the ones bringing the money. We should get everything we ask for, right? These guys are going, finance is here, right? We're the only adults in this company, right? We need to give adult supervision. Look at these crazy guys. I want to sell this, get paid that way, et cetera, et cetera. And these guys, of course, believe, they're the future, right? So they should get all the resources. And so it's a fine balance that somebody needs to lead between these 3 zones. And then here, you enter at your own peril. Only when it's necessary, only when you need to transform the company, because the critical thing on the transformation zone is if you don't dedicate basically all your resources, there's a very low chance of success. Okay, so if we map that with the horizons, These two are Horizon 1, Horizon 3, and really that's the Horizon 2. Okay? Remember, this is only when you're dealing in disruptive innovation. If you're doing sustaining innovation, don't get into the transformation zone. Do not get into the transformation zone unless you're willing to actually really bet the company on that. Okay. So let's assume you did need to get into the transformation zone. Right? So there's zone offense, like I said, which is when you bring something completely disruptive to the market. A good example of that is Uber. Right? If you think about it, Uber basically was a business model change for people. Completely disruptive, several markets. Right? Zone defense is when it happens to you. Right? So a lot of those waves, like, I ran Silicon Graphics. You know what our biggest concern was when I was running Silicon Graphics? Cloud. Because hardware was basically being commoditized fully, right? So the market brought this to us. We didn't bring it to the market. Years ago, actually a couple of decades ago, we brought true supercomputing to the market, and that was a zone offense. It gave us great success in the late 80s and early 90s, and then the waves, like in nature, they fall away, right? But, so these are some of the thoughts, right? Actually, let's start with the bottom. Typically, 10% of transformations are offense. 90% are defense. The market does it to you. So if you're here, which is the most normal one, you got to take that patient to the emergency room. They might not notice it, but they're dying, right? They are. And there's, I can rattle names after name after name of companies who had a great first wave and then didn't catch the second. Right? Many, right? Sun, SGI, first time around, digital equipment, you name it. Big, big names that were hugely successful on their first wave, and they didn't catch the second, right? Here, you don't necessarily need to enter the actual transformation zone. Here you do. You need to navigate the bottleneck, sorry. Okay? So different approaches to the different types of innovation that are disrupting your company. So it's not business as usual, right? If you have to get into the transformation zone, it's not business as usual. Many of you have talked about transformation, right? But the truth is, for many of the companies, it isn't really a transformation. It's a realignment. Right? So treat it differently, and I'll go through a little bit later. And so it must be the top priority. Right? Failure is not an option. So for companies who are basically being completely displaced by cloud or by mobile or whatnot, staying and doing the same thing you were doing is not going to work. You have to transform. Right? A total alignment is necessary. The CEO is in charge. You must provide the resources. You might open doors, tackle breakdowns. You got to get the board, if you have a board, if you're a large enough company, you got to get the board aligned. It's critical. And the compensation ought to be tied to achieving that success. I'm a big believer in aligning compensation with behavior and results. Otherwise, people will do what they're getting rewarded for. Right? And key milestones become the tipping points, right? So in zone offense, you want to get to 10% of the revenue of the company fairly quickly to actually be material. Otherwise, you're playing. It's a hobby. It's not really a transformation. And on zone defense, you want to accelerate growth by getting to the next S-curve, okay? And again, creates massive stress on the go-to-market resources because they want to sell what you had because they know how to do that. And now you're putting them in place to actually sell something new that you don't even know if it's going to work, but you got to actually seed the market, okay? All right, and so this is the kind of the summary, right? So there's change that you can address by staying in the productivity zone. So if something is impacting only your infrastructure model, you don't need to get to a transformation zone. You can stay in the productivity zone. You want to optimize your operations. Okay? For many companies who are already on that wave, this is the change they need to execute. Okay? If you are in the performance zone and you want to change your operating model, you can stay in the performance zone and just modernize one of your businesses. You know, take it out of Horizon 3, put it through the funnel, in this case, not the hourglass, and get it there. So have something much more efficient, newer. And if you want to change your, or if you want to or need to change your business model, you need to enter the transformation zone. And then you really do transform your whole business portfolio. So, for example, this is overlaying the whole culture map, right? So if you're going to be in transformation, the best mood to have is zeal, right? A full dedication to something, and that something is be successful with your transformation. The style that is good is either play to win or be opportunistic. And the focus is on the mission. Right? If you want to stay in the performance zone, admiration, be pragmatic, be cool. The customer focus is essential, right? So on and so forth. The non-optimal ones in transformation are arrogance, please the boss, right? I've done a lot of business in Japan. Typical mood, typical style is this. Very hierarchical. Somebody says, go do X, and they'll do it even though they know it's not the right thing to do. Right? And the employee focus in transformation is not the right one. You really need agility, you need decisions. All right? And then to tie it all up, those are the zones, those are the horizons, and that's how you map, you know, mood, style. And so this is the ideal to enter a transformation. Right? Play to win, zeal, stay, you know, in this zone, and with that assessment, you can assess, are we ready as a company to actually go enter transformation or not, or is it really change, but that can stay inside of one of these, okay? And I think that's it. So I don't know if there's any more questions or time for anything else. Vivi's looking at me with a mean eye now. And anyway, thank you very much. Hope this was interesting.